In this series, we're going to show you some things you may not like. In fact, many of the things we're going to show you, I don't like. Moreover, much of the information being examined and many of these historical figures we'll be exploring, you will most likely have never heard of, and that's okay. I didn't know any of it either, which is actually what inspired me to make this for you. Because the truth is, some history is purposefully being forgotten. Some of our memories are intentionally being erased. In this episode, we'll let some of these almost forgotten experts speak for themselves, and through their own words and documents examine how the mechanism of expertise has been used to sculpt our society out of the bedrock that is human life on this planet.
Hello, I'm Rue McClanahan, and the film you're about to see was made 20 years ago. Now, that sounds like a long time, but you'll see that what was going on then looks as if it could have been yesterday, or today even. Survival of Spaceship Earth was commissioned and produced for the United Nations' first conference on the human environment, which was held in 1972. It was the first global meeting of its kind, and everybody came. That's right, 136 countries. Ambassadors from every nation in the world got together to talk about the planet Earth. Never happened before or since in the history of time. Can you imagine 136 gorgeous men from all over the world bunched together like that? And I missed it. Aww.
I myself see Stockholm be the place and time at which the people of the earth working together dedicated themselves to producing in the last 25 years of our century of science, the 20th century, dedicating themselves to using their intellectual, technological, and scientific resources to bringing man into equilibrium.
The point of all conferences is that they validate something, they bring it to people's attention, they give it a kind of sanction, and then it's possible for each government and possible for the people of each country to go ahead and act.
After 2 years of intensive preparation, we have placed before the governments of the world a program of action that is really without precedent.
All throughout time, there have been and will continue to be key moments that change the world. Much like any story, perhaps the most crucial of these moments is where we begin. Survival of Spaceship Earth is a document created to be shown at the Stockholm World Conference on Human Environment, and its arrival marks such a turning point.
One of the world's great women, a foremost anthropologist and a great humanist, Dr. Margaret Mead explains her view.
In this whole population question, I think we have to talk first about balance. We want to balance the population, the people that are here at any one time, with the resources at any one time. And we know at the moment we don't have the resources. We don't have the teachers to teach them. We don't have the doctors to care for them. We don't have enough older people to care for them because the older people are still dying. The children we've been saving. And in countries like the United States and Northern Europe, each child at present is responsible for using so much energy and producing so much pollution that this is a danger too. And we have to recognize also that the industrialized countries must balance their population as vigorously or more vigorously than they ask any other part of the world to do. Because we may not be as poor. We may be able to feed our populations on beautifully packaged food that's been very carefully set up and is using tremendous amounts of polluting materials to bring that food into our homes. This population increase is endangering the quality of life everywhere.
Dr. Rene Dubos, the eminent microbiologist, is recognized as one of the world's foremost scientific humanists and a Pulitzer Prize winner.
Let's pause here for a moment and gaze into the vast ideological window that is Scientific Humanism. In order to best and most briefly explain humanism, I find Sir Julian Huxley's defining work on the subject to be the most applicable, namely, his chapter called The Enlightenment and the Population Problem, wherein he essentially lays out Malthusian ethics to be the key framework by which all critical concepts of mankind's population and resource management should be decided. In this, he makes a moral argument of good stewardship over the planet, without the need for any pesky gods, and the only devil being humankind in its current state of evolution. This perception of self as a caretaker and others as takers did not begin with Malthus. However, those who share it, much like Sir Julian, often reference his work and champion the concept of quality over quantity in which it represents. And for those of us who may not be familiar with the reference, or could at least benefit from a quick refresher, let's go to the timeline. Prior to the Malthusian equation, world populations were primarily viewed through a tribalistic and then nationalistic mindset, wherein strength in numbers was paramount, so large families were encouraged as war was always imminent. About 100 years after a small but notable disagreement between the Catholic Church and a newly established scientific academy regarding the findings of a man named Galileo, Malthus, like many others of the time, had deeply considered humanity and its relationship to our now finite planet. In these contemplations, he calculated that humans will inevitably outbreed their resources, which leads to overcrowded conditions, scarcity, and ultimately war. This concept inspired a series of scientific and ethical discussions, fueled entirely new ideologies and outlooks alongside a revolution in the ongoing war between science and God. The concept of controlling birth in order to conserve quality of life, avoid war, and prevent scarcity continues to be one of the most divisive and complicated ethical debates throughout our world today. It is truly astounding to realize that the same calculation which influenced the great conservationism movements also inspired many of the atrocities of World War II. Re-enter Sir Julian Huxley. The grandson of Darwinism's greatest defender and academic icon, T.H. Huxley, Sir Julian was not only a world-leading expert, he was the world-leading expert, from a long family line that would continue to be world-leading experts. As the founding Director General of UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, he arguably held more influence and authority over the world's scientific and cultural education than any human in history. When Sir Julian wasn't busy weighing in his extensive level of expertise as founding director of or advisor to one committee, council, country, or another, he was founding philanthropic institutions, fundraisers, financial centers, and action teams in all corners of the globe. It's important to be clear about something here. Ideological figureheads and big talkers come and go, but Sir Julian Huxley's signature had the power to, and in fact did, change the world. Not only did his scientific endeavors help humanity to explain itself to itself, but Sir Julian's life centered around making the world a better place according to his strongly held ethical values, which, much to his credit, were never concealed or obstructed as he expressed them often and openly. Huxley Foundations continue to fund the research, develop the technology, and encourage the ideas put into action so long ago. In UNESCO's founding document on unifying the sciences and humanities under a shared one world vision, Sir Julian explains his ambitions to establish liberal arts, semantics, and humanities studies all over the globe as a mechanism of social study and control. Though perhaps more interestingly, he also lays bare the fundamental ideology and reasoning behind the now global scientific and cultural education agendas. Let's dig in. In the chapter entitled Quality and Quantity, Sir Julian tells us there is an optimum range of human population density and of total population in the world, and explains the importance of the promotion of one single pool of scientific knowledge. It must also eventually include a unified common outlook and a common set of purposes. This will be the latest part of the task of unifying the world mind. In his chapter entitled The Principle of Equality and the Fact of Inequality, he notes, it is also much harder to reconcile politically with the current democratic doctrine of equality. In the face of it, indeed the principle of equality of opportunity must be amended to read equality of opportunity within limits of aptitude. Continuing on page 21, biological inequality is, of course, the bedrock fact on which all of eugenics is predicated. The inequality of mere differences is desirable in the preservation of human variety, and should be one of two primary aims of eugenics. At the moment, it is probable that the direct effect of civilization is dysgenic instead of eugenic, and in any case, it seems likely that the dead weight of genetic stupidity, physical weakness, mental instability, and disease proneness, which already exist in the human species, will provide too great a burden for the real progress to be achieved. Thus, even though it is quite true that any radical eugenic policy will for many years be politically and psychologically impossible, it will be important for UNESCO to see that the eugenic problem is explained with the greatest care, and that the public mind is informed of the issues at stake, so that much of the now unthinkable may at least become thinkable. Wow. Let's let that sink in a moment. He just said that radical eugenic policy will be for many years politically and psychologically impossible? UNESCO should see that the eugenic problem is explained with the greatest care, so that much that is now unthinkable will at least become thinkable? Okay, must keep reading. Even when social data can be put completely into quantitative form, as, for instance, medical statistics or economic returns, human feelings, values, and purposes must be taken into account before we can either understand or hope to exercise proper control over them. Thus, UNESCO, which is concerned with all higher activities of man, must endeavor to see that science is tempered with art, and in general, that society is imbued with a proper sense of scale and values. UNESCO cannot be neutral in the face of competing values. Continuing, here it will be guided by the philosophy of evolutionary humanism. Okay. Now that we've established the links between Sir Julian's view on humanism becoming an official institutional policy at the UN, I guess that better explains why the experts we're hearing from are scientific humanists. And now that we all better understand the views that are being expressed, we come to a segment I'd like to call Indisputable Conformation.
Indisputable Conformation.
Sir Julian, please continue. However, if UNESCO is to have real social policy, it must not confine itself to such general studies, but must also face up to the particular problems which press on the modern world. Simply as illustrative examples, I will mention the population, the conservation of wildlife, and semantics. The recognition of the idea of an optimum population size, of course relative to technological and social conditions, is an indispensable first step towards the planned control of populations which is necessary if man's blind reproductive urges are not to wreck his ideals and his plans for a material and spiritual betterment. In the ultimate interest of mankind as a whole, the spread of man must take second place to the conservation of other species. A little over a decade after Huxley completed his work at UNESCO, Julian received his knighthood, along with multiple prestigious awards and high honors. Most relevant to this topic being his Lasker Foundation Award for Planned Parenthood in the category Population Control. The dedication reads, "To Sir Julian Sorel Huxley, Fellow of the Royal Society, ornithologist, biologist, teacher, conservationist, poet, and humanist, in recognition of the more than 3 decades of study and lucid interpretation of population phenomena. He has brilliantly and courageously carried on his family's tradition of staunch support and scientific truth, even, or especially, in the areas of sharpest controversy. He has used his scientific preeminence to define the demographic problem in qualitative as well as quantitative dimensions, in a way that has moved it beyond the realm of reasonable doubt to an area of compelling urgency. He has been able to catch the respectful attention of parliaments of the people, as well as his scientific peers. Ever an opponent of obscurantism, he has sought to place the clear beacon of science as a light on the way of man. From university to UNESCO, to the British Broadcasting Company's Brain Trust, he has stimulated, inspired, and delighted millions and brought them to the joys of understanding. He has probably given more people a comprehension of the importance of the population problem and necessity of controlling it than any man of his time. The idea to reframe the discussion surrounding population control around the environmental concerns had already been taking place at an academic and institutional level for over 20 years at the time this film was made. Humanism had become a dominant institutional outlook, and in preparation for this conference, Dr. Rene Dubos, who I might also add was a lifelong head of research at the Rockefeller Institute, retired to publish Only One Earth, an unofficial report commissioned by the UN, which remains a landmark and foundational study. Dr. Rene Dubos famously goes on to popularize the term think globally, act locally in his role as an expert consultant and public spokesman for the 1972 Conference on Human Environment.
And a Pulitzer Prize winner.
At the present time, the population in this country and in Europe is increasing at the rate of about 1% a year, whereas the consumption of electric power and the consumption of resources is increasing at the rate of 6% a year. So that even if we were to stop population growth, we are not going to solve our problems unless we do something about the technological enterprise. So first, let me make clear that control of the technological enterprise is just as important as control of population. But after saying this much, I also believe that unless we control population, we won't solve our problem.
So in this generation, now, we should invite fewer people to be born.
In the years following this film and the institutional impact of the studies it represented, over 65 million abortions have occurred in America alone. Globally, this number is in the billions, with the WHO estimating an average of 40 to 50 million abortions occurring each year. Infanticide, along with sterilization, prevented the lives of an untold additional millions. Meanwhile, in Western societies, education, pop culture, and political movements have maintained a continually negative shifting view towards sexuality, gender, and the concept of breeding altogether. The most notable institutional example is the well-known nonprofit Planned Parenthood, whose widely accepted eugenic history seems only worth mentioning while pointing out that they are currently one of the world's leading distribution centers of sterilization pharmaceuticals, grossing tens of millions of dollars each year on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormone treatments that do sterilize children. If it seems radical to consider that the scientific and cultural popularization of self-sterilization is directly linked to official institutional policy, I'd like to please allow our experts to explain.
The basic cause of the problem is people. As the population of the world rapidly increases, there is greater demand on the Earth's basic resources of land, water, and air. This planet's capacity to give sustenance and to absorb and recycle waste is not boundless. And in the next 25 years, the Earth's population will increase more than it has in the last million years. And to the nations of the world, this poses a greater threat than anything we have experienced before.
President Nixon and the United States Congress established the Commission on Population Growth and the American Future. The chairman of this unique commission is John D. Rockefeller III.
It was a very broad-ranging mandate. Nobody's had one of this character before. And just from that, this question of quality of life just emerged as the seemingly key issue.
But the main finding was that stabilization of some kind is clearly desirable for the country.
Yes, we said that it is recognized that population cannot continue to grow indefinitely. Nobody questions that. And we said from our findings, we felt that now the nation should welcome and plan for a stabilized population. Well, the whole question of pollution, environment, and population came very much to the fore in amazingly rapid time. And President Nixon, in July 1969, made a statement to the Congress exclusively on this question. And I'd like to read just 2 sentences from that statement, as I think it's indicative of his concern in regard to the subject and his recognition of its importance here and around the world. He said, "One of the most serious challenges to human destiny in the last third of this century will be the growth of the population. Whether man's response to this challenge will be a cause for pride or for despair in the year 2000 will depend very much on what we do today."
This commission, at the urgent request of President Nixon, and after 2 years of studying the problem, recommended that laws prohibiting abortion be liberalized, that government funds be made available to cover abortion services, and that abortion be covered in health insurance. Families are encouraged to have 2 children, and it is suggested that sex education be widely available. The Population Commission also urges that individual states encourage teenagers to receive contraceptive services and hospitals relax policies concerning voluntary sterility and make it easier to obtain.
As we lock this moment into our timeline, it's important to note that by 1972, the Rockefeller Foundation had already been advising the world's leadership on policy and providing institutional funding for over 5 decades of research in this area of study. Additionally important to note, in case the societal impact of these studies is still a question on your mind, go ahead and check out this very same population report in the section on food and diet, submitting the then radical ideas of pivoting our population's diet over to plants, creating food factories, and engineering synthetic meats. In today's world, it's easy to forget why we all know the name Rockefeller. We see the buildings, recognize the center, understand the pop culture references, but few realize that this family is one of the primary reasons we have anti-monopoly laws in the United States. At one point in history, their company Standard Oil shook the entire world upside down by its heels, and afterward decided to use the great fortune they had amassed to reshape society beneath the banner of their philanthropic endeavors. In the turn of the 20th century, John D. Rockefeller, like many others, had a vision for education in the modern world. However, unlike many others, he also possessed unimaginable wealth. $5.5 billion of which he donated in 1902 alone, towards the founding of the General Education Board in America, one of the 3 major institutions responsible for building the education system in this country and pioneering the research towards the founding of public and academic education systems throughout the world. Alongside general education, John D. also had a pressing interest in medical research, which is why 1 year previously, in 1901, he alongside fellow tycoons Andrew Carnegie and J.P. Morgan decided to finance dramatic changes in the institutional infrastructure of the medical industry. Within a few years, those first research projects started bearing fruit and affected laws and policies throughout the world. John D. Rockefeller III re-enters our discussion via his lifelong dedication to the Rockefeller Foundation, most notable of which is his founding leadership of the Population Council, which he established in 1952. By that time, his father John D. II had not only assisted in the construction of the League of Nations, but also in its successful transition via conversion to the UN after the last Great War. In fact, in my research, I was surprised to learn that not only had the Rockefellers donated the land the UN headquarters is now built on here in America, but they had also signed over the League of Nations Library in Geneva, along with many other holdings. Now, I'm not surprised at all when I see Rockefellers at every UN event, most especially when it's often their name on the receipts. Which brings us back to JD3 and the commissioning of these studies for this film. Through a long series of internationally philanthropic endeavors, the Rockefeller Foundation has deliberately cultivated and developed research to embody official authority on a world scale. Just to drive this point home, many studies, though often valid, may be driven by an ideology. For instance, John D. Rockefeller III began cultivating this research by making institutional grants and funds available via his Population Council in 1952. This investment then incubated an ideological framework in academic study. The cycle of 20 years between each of these events is also no coincidence or some numerological phenomenon. It is because 20 years is exactly how long it takes to grow and develop a new generation of thinkers. For a well-seated reality to establish and shape our identities within it. Each of these 20-year periods marks a notable shift in the public image, and each rebranding was successfully followed up with institutional policy adjustments, well-financed and highly promoted social initiatives, and an ever-growing authority center over all global concerns. In summation, John D. Rockefeller III was a lifelong and outspoken eugenicist who genuinely felt birth control was the most pressing issue of an era that was experiencing a population boom unlike the world had ever known. This report was a culmination of John D. III's life's work, and it was ultimately built upon the foundations of his father's work, and his father before him. It's important to acknowledge here that this isn't some evil conspiracy or secret cabal I claim to be uncovering. This is all well-cited and publicly available information, Further, good and evil seem to be relatively abstract concepts in any discussion of ideology. Historically speaking, acting out of the greater good has had dire consequences, of which those who endure perceive as evil. This is a great discussion, and one we will have. But as we conclude our examination of this document and the impact these visionary experts have had on our world, let's meet Maurice Strong, who was tasked with turning these expert opinions into a now international policy, along with a movement that would unite the world. Maurice is truly the unsung stepfather of the Green Revolution, as well as the underappreciated prophet of the global humanist movement. As the UN Secretary General, he was the guy who not only put these events and documents together, but also commissioned the research, chaired the committees, and oversaw the massive undertaking of our next stop, the 1972 World Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment.